Hello, everybody. Yet another episode of NanaTalks podcast. As always, share, like, subscribe. Well, you know the drill. And today I have incredible Courtney Zaugg joining me. Thank you so much for joining. We've tried to make that happen at least a couple times in a row.
We have, yes.
Yeah, but today here we are, and I'm super happy about that. So let's jump right into. I know that previously we talked a little bit about the fact that you were not conventional, not typical military spouse. Correct me there, because I do not remember what was the exact wording you've used, but I
I
do
am a
remember that
veteran spouse. Yes. Not of
yes,
active duty military spouse, but a veteran spouse.
veteran spouse. So okay, now educate me. What's the difference, and why is that important?
It is, the difference is I met my husband right after he got out of the Marine Corps. So I was never with him when he was active duty in the Marine Corps. And that's an
So you
important
got all the
distinction.
best.
The best, yes, I think possibly maybe the worst. I don't know. But I will say, his transition out of the Marine Corps certainly had everything to do with us becoming entrepreneurs. I also think the distinction is important because the challenges and also the opportunities that military spouses have because of their constant being on the move and all the things that they have to do with often without a support system is important to recognize. And so while, I can admire that and support that from afar, like I don't have that same experience. I think my experience in the evolution of our career paths and new dream together was because of his experience in the Marine Corps and the transition out. But that's a very different experience than being an active duty military spouse. And so I need that distinction is important to recognize.
Yeah, so give me more about transition. What was that about? Like you've tried to
I
build the
think,
career and then decided,
yes,
you know what, just F that, flip the table, let's build something on our own or
yes, it actually had everything. Yes, exactly that. And in addition, I think that we had to build a new career dream together. So my educational background is in international economic development. So I was applying for jobs in Afghanistan and other places. And, he had come back from 2 tours in Iraq. He was enlisted, so he was using his GI Bill. And when I said, hey, I applied for this job. It's my dream job. What do you think about it? It's in Afghanistan. And he said, I think that I'll send you with a flak jacket and a pistol and tell you good luck because I'm not going back to war. And so that was a pivotal point in our relationship of figuring out how do we be together in the same place at the same time, but still have work and have a career that we love and that we find impactful and that we're somehow making a difference and giving back. And it took us a while to figure that out. That eventually led to us starting a construction company in 2017. And I think, the evolution of our work together in entrepreneurship and how VentureVets came to be had everything to do with, had there been more flexibility and more options when he transitioned out of the Marine Corps, instead of just, using his GI Bill to go to school, which school is good. Nothing wrong with that at all. But if there had been other opportunities to maybe learn more about entrepreneurship and learn more about what does it mean to, start a career in entrepreneurship, using the skills that you have in the Marine Corps. What does it mean to start a career in entrepreneurship, doing other things that you love, like working with your hands? And there that didn't exist in 2005 when he got out. I would argue more of it exists now, but it's still not good enough. But it took us a while, and so through that, process of our journey, our entrepreneurial journey, we wanted to make it easier for others to start a business and to grow a business. And so we did that. We did that on a concierge level, just matching people with the right types of mentors or resources, would be it capital or, trying to figure out how to hire talent or CPAs or bankers, whatever that looked like. until eventually VentureVets became a formalized thing, which is what it is today.
And what it is today, because I'm sure that not everybody knows what VentureVets is about and what it is today.
Yeah, I think I don't like to use the term accelerator, but that's probably the most common understandable term. But we help companies start and grow their businesses. Folks that are veterans or military spouses, or a child of a military person, of a veteran. And we do that in a variety of different ways. We do have cohort programs. We do have investment opportunities, both dilutive and non-dilutive opportunities for investment. But we also just simply will connect folks in our ecosystem and network with the best fit for whatever that resource might be. And at the end of the day, this is about mentorship and it's about community. And we're very lucky that we have been able to help others like us um, that come after us. But VentureVets is that type of program. The other thing I want to make sure, much like the differentiator between being a military spouse and a veteran spouse, is that we're not here to duplicate resources. There are other programs that are great that we have been a part of. Bunker Labs was one of them. Now that's with IBMF. It's Warrior Rising. There's other programs that we refer folks to, depending on their needs and whatever they're looking for in terms of resources. So we are collaborators in this broader ecosystem, um, and we will always be. But we're also trying to fill gaps, particularly here in the Midwest, which there are specific gaps in both programming, um, boots on the ground type of community, and also funding. And so that's what VentureVets is trying to fulfill.
All right, give me more about Midwest. You mentioned that there is specific lack of the resources and therefore there is a bigger demand for them. What type of resources we are talking here about?
Yeah, I think so. Anyone who's in the broader entrepreneurship ecosystem understand that there's a lot of money on the coast, and this culture of entrepreneurship and innovation is prevalent in these communities. But here in the Midwest, we are much more conservative in how we think and how we um, live life. And I'm not talking about politics; I'm talking about money. And we have done well doing that conservatively. But what that does do is then provides a little more barriers to growth, to starting and to growth for entrepreneurs. For being here, located in the Midwest, and not just in Indiana, but in the Midwest in general, versus starting or growing a business on the coast, where access to capital is much freer, and the culture of taking risk and even calculated risk is much more prevalent. And I think that is another part of VentureVets is encouraging in our community, in our military connected community, to take these calculated risks, both from an entrepreneur perspective, but also from an investor perspective.
And
And as
we're
a part of
talking about all type of industries, right? Because like
all
when
types,
you're,
correct?
mm-hmm. Because when you're
Correct.
talking about like coastal, economy or types of industry, most probably, of course, like tech related industry will pop up, right? But let's be honest over there, rural, logistic, I don't know, manufacturing, those are the industries which are currently booming, and I would imagine that they will be over there, well, essentially forever. I cannot imagine any country without logistic or rural, right, or manufacturing. Maybe without manufacturing, but I'm not sure whether we are looking or like we want to go that way. So when we were talking about, again, getting back to the Indiana and Midwest, uh what's your like vision of where this specific region will go? Like what are the
Hmm.
major stuff and things or industries? You lead me here, right? But you believe that that would be the best option for the region in general.
That's a great question. I think that because of our experience in the construction industry and real estate and economic development, as I'm an economic developer by training, we're focused on the construction and the trades, at least initially. So while in the past we have supported folks being industry agnostic, um, uh, and typically in the ideation phase, so very, very early, we're now more focused on early businesses in construction and trades, and particularly with the intersection of tech. But there is still this gap and the services that we are referring folks to regarding this other, the backbone of our economies, which are small businesses, not necessarily innovation driven businesses. And so we still have a heart for small businesses. We are a small business. Our construction company is technically a small business. And that means helping folks that are artists that have it's their side gig, but they want it to become their full-time business. Um, Folks, especially in the veteran community, want to start nonprofits. Well, not for profit doesn't mean not for revenue. You still have to build a sustainable business model for a not for profit business. What does that look like? You're a plumber. Okay, great. How do you buy, you're interested in buying a franchise. What does that look like? And what are the resources available to do that we can connect you to? We may not be the ones providing guidance on, here's the type of franchises and what the agreement might look like, but we will direct you to folks that are in our trusted network in order for you to make a successful agreement for that franchise, and so on and so forth. It's in Indiana, there's a lot happening, and especially in the veteran community, a lot in cybersecurity. And so we have worked with folks in cybersecurity startups and directing them, of course, and making introductions to the right resources as well. But for us, going back to what we know best, what we've been successful at, and what we see as an opportunity both in a national market, but also here in Indiana, and that's construction and construction tech.
Yeah, that makes sense. I've seen recently the post I believe that you've shared from the Indiana Innovation and Association, Innovation and help me here, Tech and Innovation Association. God,
Yes,
way too
yes.
much I.
ITIA, yes. All the
Still way,
acronyms.
way too much of I. Well, anyways, it feels like all the goals for 2025 are all about innovation, and it feels that majorly they're about tech side of a business. And I've participated in a couple accelerators. I've seen tons of pitch competition accelerators, etc., from all over the country, not solely coastal, and therefore typical pitches, right? And I've seen only one company, one startup, which is working with the construction.
Hmm.
So how's everything look
Interesting.
like in Indiana?
Yeah, I think it looks good. I think it looks good, especially from the Midwest perspective. I think if you looked at the data on the amount of workers that are in our veterans in the construction workforce, the percentage is quite high. I don't recall the numbers off the top of my head, but you think about the opportunities for introducing entrepreneurship to some of those workers. I think sky's the limit. And so for us, I think we're betting on ourselves. We're betting on folks in the industry. But as it relates to ITIA, Indiana specifically is known in marketing tech. So the ecosystem has grown very, very much because of successful exits for folks that have done some marketing tech companies. And so there is a concentration of that here, which is great. That's organically grown, and ITIA is a result of that. But I think the other thing that ITIA has done very well, and they've been great partners to us personally, and that is their focus on broader entrepreneurship policies. So another hat that I wear is that I am a part of this national organization called Right to Start, which all is about, advocating and educating both policymakers and civic leaders on the importance of reducing barriers to entrepreneurship. So entrepreneurship for all, right? It doesn't matter where you are born, your gender, your zip code, what type of business you're starting. You have the right to be able to start and grow a business as their platform. And here
But
in
will I
Indiana,
have possibilities? Like to have a right, that's incredible, that's amazing. But will I be able to survive?
hmm
Yeah, I'm
right,
sure that you know that it is like it's super easy to open up your LLC, C corp, B corp, doesn't really matter, blah blah corp, right? And there is
right,
slightly harder to survive, to get your first contract, get your first client, build
absolutely.
up sustainable cash flow, etc. So, right to start, yes, I'm feeling you, I'm here with you. But for me, honestly, it is much more important to address the question of crossing the valley of death for the
Absolutely.
entrepreneurs. So,
Absolutely.
I mean, we can talk about that from both perspective, from right to start or from like Indiana. And I will never be able to repeat that I da 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 I something. I have to be honest, there no way that I'm going to be able to replicate that. But like from the Indiana Innovation Association, uh, how the things are looking from that perspective, because the reason to give you the context why I'm asking about that or why I'm raising this specific topic, because like starting from my 8 guests maybe before, we started to raise up that question, and the first one was the Dr. John Sebasta from the Denver University, and we've talked about that there is still a lot of issues and barriers, not only for the folks who are trying to start the business, but for the folks who are trying to grow the business, and
Sure.
especially to survive through their year one or year two. And one of the barriers which the Dr. John Sebasta team has recognized was the fact that it is very hard for you to build up the business if there is the lack of entrepreneurial uh, knowledge in overall in your family or the closest circle you're connected to. If no one
Sure.
ever before tried to build something on their own, most probably for you, that's going to be one of the barriers you're going to need to cross.
Sure. It's connectivity, right? It's the ecosystem, and at the end of the day, it's about culture. And the policy barriers. So I think it's two different things. You have policy barriers that the Right to Start organization is working to address and to remove, and then you have programming, you have culture, and you have resources. And those are maybe they run in parallel, but they're two different topics. I think that what you're talking about is culture. If you are surrounding yourself with other entrepreneurs and like-minded folks that think about risk and calculation and access and connecting you to resources, then your chances of success are going to be a lot higher. Versus if you really don't have a lot of other entrepreneurs or folks with resources in your network, your chances of making it are much, much lower. And part of the the goal with Right to Start on the policy side is, okay, what can policymakers do to create a sandbox so that there's more people connected to other entrepreneurs to make it more successful, right? But the policies still get in the way. I think the gentleman from Denver, this culture and this mindset shift, I do believe things are changing for the better, but culture and mindset shift takes time. And, the more we can reduce policy barriers, that means to me, then a mindset shift is happening and the conversation around entrepreneurship is also shifting. For example, being an economic developer, so much previously in the previous decades, it has been all about attraction of business, large business at that, and attraction of people. All very important to any type of economy, rural, urban, suburban, whatever. Very important. But if you're only focusing on that, then you're missing out on the entrepreneurship ecosystem, which actually the ones that create jobs. So the data shows doesn't matter any community for the last I believe 30 years. It's the firms under 5 years old, so startups are the ones that actually create the jobs, not the large firms, but the young firms. And so again, changing this conversation around what is economic development, how do you create ecosystem to make connectivity for entrepreneurs to successfully start and successfully grow their businesses, it's critical. So my two
Yeah, but
cents.
can you give me more examples of like the policies which
Sure.
should be or could be or like you're reviewing right here right now, so I could, wrap my head around it.
Sure, absolutely. So I will say that this is on the Right to Start website too, if you look at their field guide. But the first and foremost is at the state level, even at the local level, particularly at the state level, but it's making one person in charge of entrepreneurship. So most of the times you have, small business development centers, but it's not really connected to one person at the state level, or it's not really connected to the economic development agency that's in charge. And so making one person in charge means that there are metrics and there's going to be some type of plan in place, right? Of how are you helping entrepreneurs across the spectrum, not just tech companies, not just small businesses, but those across the spectrum start and grow. That's first and foremost. So you'll in the field guides, you'll see this establishing an office of entrepreneurship as key. In addition, it could be things simply as, um, okay, can the state government encourage some type of policy that has young firms connected with government contracts? So, for example, most government contracts, both at the federal and state levels, require past history, past performance. You have to be much more established. But can the government be an early customer of these startups to help with growth? Can there be some type of mentor protege, program in place that exists at the federal level, maybe at the state level, or within a chamber of commerce that really helps with early customers for startups, and help us establish past performance and then, the ability to grow. Other things could be, eliminating the fee for first time founders. And I don't mean a first time founder that has established 5 different companies, but it's the first time starting this type of company. That's not the same thing. But making it just one step easier for folks to start and grow. I think actually it is in Colorado that they changed the filing fee to $1, which might be the first in the country for first time founders establishing their businesses. But the policies could range, right? It could range to all different types of things depending on what is needed most in that particular state and in that particular ecosystem.
Yeah, you mentioned two interesting things there. The first one, a couple times, you mentioned that there are small businesses and tech startups. And this is very interesting for me because essentially tech startups are also small businesses. They're supposed to be under umbrella of small businesses in a way, right? But by some reasons, in many, many cases, and that's not only you, but like almost, I don't want to say everybody, let's say majority, gonna split those two groups of companies by some reasons. I would imagine that mainly because of the funding types, right? They're eligible for, which is still a big question for me because I do not understand why you cannot invest in small business from the conservative industries. I would be more than happy to invest in logistic company and I don't know in pizzeria, or I've just talked to the military spouse Tina Toro Evans, and she has this great business of creating and providing opportunity to rent silk flowers. And the business idea, the business plan behind of it seems for me quite great. And I did not see why I cannot invest in this specific business. Yes, we're not talking here about like 10x. Now, most probably we won't see hockey stick growth, right? I mean, triple, triple, double, double, not applicable for most of the companies this type, more on the conservative and hard asset type of industries, but they're still showing growth and they still need a lot of support. They need money, and in many, many cases, they gonna need that money specifically to scale, not to like, unlike I'd say the typical so-called AI startup, right? Give me 8 million and I'm gonna blow them in 2 months. Ta-da! That's most probably not gonna happen with the small businesses, but we are still, by some reasons, are separating them. So I
Well,
would,
I think it's necessary to separate them because their needs and their trajectory they're very different. Do they still have similar and overlapping needs of how to hire, how to make sure that the organizational structure is the best as they grow, things of that sort? Yes, absolutely. But from an investment perspective, their needs and how they scale it is very different. It is very, very different, and therefore the type of investor also likely needs to be different as well. Um, so I understand that there is overlap, but I think, the scalability piece is what differentiates them.
Yeah, absolutely. So, okay, getting back to the idea of having one person in charge on the government level or on the state level, should that be one person for both, for the small businesses and tech related startups, or it should be.
It depends on the state. And so Right to Start does not get prescriptive about what each state needs. It talks more about the principle of making one, having one person in charge to make sure these things happen. But each state is very different. And I think, so for example, the ecosystem and what's happening in Nevada, they just established an Office of Entrepreneurship. They were the first in the country to do so. And they're starting out um, really from building this from the ground up. In Indiana, there has been a lot of work that's being done by the state economic development organization in terms of programming and funding and capacity building for entrepreneur support organizations. That's very different than what's been happening in Nevada. And so what will work in Nevada probably won't work in Indiana, but does one person need to be in charge of the respective, focus on entrepreneurship? Absolutely. But, you know, the, there's like going to be a lot more that needs to be uh, defined in Indiana than it does in Nevada because they've been doing it differently and more comprehensively in Indiana than in Nevada. So Right to Start does not meddle into what does each state or each municipality need to do. It's more about the principles of how to remove these policy barriers to entrepreneurship.
The more you're sharing, the more it's like it's interesting for me. So, okay, here's my next question. Again, you mentioned that one of the reasons why you're recommending to have one person in charge because, and like oftentimes SBA aren't connected to the other types of funding, mentorship, and etc. And I'm wondering what are the major reasoning behind of that, because it feels like we already have one source of truth, or presumably have, and that would be SBA, right, for the small business owners or whatever. But from what I'm hearing, it's not working.
No, that's not what I'm saying at all. And the SBA is at the federal level that then funnels down money and organization, funding to the small business development centers in the state. But that's, it's not that it's not working. In fact, I would argue that in many cases it is working, but there's much more to small business and ecosystem building than just a small business development center, right? So you have organizations that focus on tech, you have organizations that focus on ag or on manufacturing and logistics. And it's the connectivity to all of these organizations that make the difference. Going back to your Denver professor example, um, in many cases, in other states, especially, I would say Indiana does a better job at this. There is connectivity, but who's in charge? If no one's in charge, then what's happening? If there are lots of things happening at the same time, making sure that there isn't overlap, but there's actual collaboration so that resources are allocated more effectively is important. But the SBA plays a critical role, and frankly, in their evolution, especially in the last 5 to 10 years, has been phenomenal. But that's also at the federal level, and only so much of that, can impact a state. There's lots of the things that can happen at the state and at the local level from a policy perspective that are important. SBA doesn't focus on policy. They focus on programming and on funding. And so that's the other piece too of that's great. These things are happening, but policy can also be a huge barrier to entrepreneurship.
Yeah, absolutely. So my next question would be about you mentioned like two examples, Nevada and Indiana. When Nevada is building everything from ground up and Indiana has something already, right? Uh,
Right.
so we'll be able that maybe one representative from Nevada come to Indiana and leverage everything that Indiana already built and learn from it. Because you mentioned the
Yes.
collaboration
Yeah.
inside of a state, but I imagine that there is supposed to be some collaboration on the federal level.
Um, Tell me more. What do you mean collaboration at the federal level?
Once again, I'm that like poor guy or girl from Nevada, and I have to build it up like just from zero, and I have no idea. And essentially, I am the startup founder, in essence.
Oh,
And
right.
and now I want to talk to someone, and I want to avoid typical mistakes, but I have no idea what are the typical mistakes
Sure,
around
sure.
building stuff and things like that, because I mean it's always going to be very challenging to build something. It doesn't really matter whether it's collaboration inside of the company, inside of the, I don't know, state organization. Between state organization, I would imagine that it might be even harder to do, right? So where they can come.
I'm sure. Yeah. Well, the states are already talking. Nevada has already been talking with Indiana. Even, early on in the stages of talking about establishing an Office of Entrepreneurship, and other states affiliated using the Right to Start framework and the policy guides have also been talking. And there's organizations out there that support ecosystem builders. So there's the Startup Champions Network that really puts a, puts together programming and events across the country a couple times a year. There's the Ecosystem Builders Leadership Network, which is mostly an online platform, but they also get together and have events to share best practices and case studies. That came out of the Coffin Foundation, the eShip Summit. And so there's a lot of cross collaboration and peer learning about what's working in different communities and what's not, which I'm really excited about, because 10 years ago, people, I don't even think people talked about ecosystem building. People didn't talk, candidly and openly and named, entrepreneurship led economic development. That the industry as a whole has evolved. And I am, I have Victor Wong and I have Penny Lewandowski and I have Mo Collins in large part to thank for that. They have been leaders in this work for decades. And so to see the evolution of it and being so prominent in um, the conversation around entrepreneurship and the conversation in the economic development industry has everything to do with them. And Victor Wong is the founder of Right to Start. And so he, has been doing this work for so long that he saw an opportunity and a need that these policy barriers and civic leaders and policymakers wanted to, were eager for the conversation around how to make their economies better. And entrepreneurship certainly is a key to that.
Yeah, so let's get back to the very beginning of our conversation. The
Okay.
fact that you're a veteran spouse, not military spouse, and this transition process. I would imagine that a lot of military spouses were preparing themselves to go through that transition period, or like going through that right here, right now. And I'd bet that they're struggling.
Yeah, I think that's normal. I think that's normal. I think, I think everyone commonly can understand that there's an identity shift. And I think it's harder to have an identity shift when you are later in age, and have a lot of experience. But I think the identity shift, um, is hard physically and emotionally and psychologically. But I think that's where community is so important, and connectivity with others that are going through it is so important. I think adding into that, how hard entrepreneurship is another layer of stress mentally, and stress into your family, um, especially when you haven't been around entrepreneurs either growing up or in the military, right, in active duty. Even though you think, I mean, I would argue that uh, military personnel have to be entrepreneurial. They're always contingency planning, and military and active duty military spouses are always contingency planning, and that is a critical piece of success in entrepreneurship. Um, but it's just so much to do with identity and this transition out. But I think the good thing as well is my husband's been out of the military almost 20 years now. 2025 will be 20 years, and a lot has changed, and the conversation around the transition has changed, and the conversation around making sure that you have these things in place in order to um, to muffle the blow of transitioning to civilian life is really important. It's very important. And that's good. That's a really, really good thing. And again, that's the goal of VentureVets is to make it easier in some way for others to start their and grow their businesses because it was hard even for us where we had a network and we had resources and I grew up in a family of entrepreneurs who failed by the way but I grew up in a family of entrepreneurs. It was still incredibly difficult and so being able to connect and help others is really important, and it's something that we'll always do, whether we are it's we're being paid for a job for it or not. Like it's something we will always do.
Yeah, absolutely. But to be totally honest with you, I'm more interested in the experience of the spouse rather than just veteran, because it seems to me that yes, you're absolutely right, and even Riverside now agrees with me that the needle in the understanding of what does the transition means for veterans started to move. But I'm not sure if the needle has moved in the conversation connected to the spouses. Because if you're a couple, you're going through good and bad times together. There is no way that you're going to shield yourself as the spouse out of the any experience, right? Your family member is going through. And I
Yeah,
haven't seen, but maybe I'm wrong, and I'm keep asking about that. I haven't seen that much of the resources for the military spouses or veteran spouses, which will help to address transitioning. Well, it's not issues, challenges.
right. Well, I think at the federal level there have been changes from a policy perspective, and that's really great. Is it good? Is it the best? No, but it's a really good start. And I think folks like Liz O'Brien at Hiring Our Heroes has a career accelerator for military spouses. Those are all positive signs. Again, more needs to be done, but I think again, for the first time in a long, maybe forever, they're talking about the entire family and supporting the entire family, both during service, but also the transition out. And that's how it has to happen. And I think, uh, you can always, talk about, the why behind it. And I think there's lots of whys behind it. Suicide rate is probably number one. The lack of people signing up to join the military might be number two. And maybe maybe it's flip flopped, but good things are happening and there are folks behind the scenes working hard to better address the needs of military spouses and address the needs of the family as a whole. I think for me, VentureVets and the evolution of it regarding our cohorts and regarding whatever funding we're providing is absolutely inclusive of military spouses, and that's a non-negotiable for me. Um, One because I see the need, but also um, if I'm successful and if a military spouse or a veteran spouse is successful, then the family is going to be successful too. And so including that is paramount for the work that we do.
Yeah, absolutely. But may you please define for me, like, who are included into the cohort of military spouse and veteran spouse? Like,
So
to give you the example or the context why I'm asking, to like not turning that into yet another, like, clickbait. Uh, I'm wondering if you're also include into the category of military spouses who went through divorce. So
yes,
now at the moment, they're
yes,
not
absolutely.
spouse or of the like essentially they are not military or veteran spouse because they went through divorce. But of course they
They were,
face,
but they
yeah.
were a military spouse. Yes. Yeah. In fact, one of my a very good friend, Grace Belangia, who uh, has done a ton of startup work, supported entrepreneurs, um, supported the change in federal policy related to entrepreneurship, um, is a former military spouse. And so, the definition doesn't have to be strict. They do need to be connected strongly with the military, but you could be a divorce, which divorce rates in the military are very high as well. And so, thinking
Understandably,
about
I'd say.
right with the stress and all the variables. But yes, they absolutely can be a divorced military spouse without a doubt.
That's great. The main reason why I've asked about that, because I've just recently went through the government regulation connected to the certified businesses and etc. And like on the government level, you cannot be certified as a military spouse, right? But my question was, okay, let's imagine that I've built together with essentially as the family member this business, and now we're going through divorce. So like, will I be able to still be certified? Will I be able to
Hmm.
run that business? And the answer was no. Only in case if you're essentially, if the family member who built the business, who were certified, was 100% disabled veteran,
Hmm.
100%, you have a right to get some percentage out of the company for 3 or 5 years. I might be wrong here. And that's it. And oh, yeah. And that was yet another thing which pissed me off a lot. That was this like line that the military spouse has to be the different sex and gender than
Oh,
the
interesting.
than
Hmm.
the certified essentially veteran who owned the business. And I was super pissed off about that
Wow. That is
because it is
interesting.
almost 2025 and we still have that one line.
Wow. I did not know that.
Yeah, me neither. I just like, I wanted to check it out, because like, I was preparing for our conversation and other conversations, and I was just trying to educate myself. I was like, hold on. Okay, let's go through that once again and once again. And no, nothing changed like, as I was looking at it.
Wow. Wow.
So you're absolutely right. There is a lot of work to be done. And I'm super grateful and happy that you're doing that with the
Thanks.
right to
Thank you.
start, with like, with VentureVet. You're moving the needle, and that's important. I tend to believe that the first thing we have to do is to talk about it, right? To just
Certainly.
bring awareness to all of these problems, right? Now I've shared
I
with
agree.
you like my concerns. You're going to share it with someone else, and at some moment of a time this one line will be revisited, and I'm sure of it,
Yeah.
because that's
Yeah.
the way how we're developing everything around us, right? So there you go. All right, to wrap up, are you planning to launch any new cohorts in the VentureVets?
We are. So we're running an existing cohort specific to Indiana companies in construction and trades. So that's just small businesses. But at the end of 2025, we are launching a construction tech cohort attached to an investment vehicle. And that will be open to anyone throughout the country, but specific to veterans, military connected, military spouses as well.
Awesome. So end of 2025.
Yes. Yes.
And
Keep an eye out.
yeah, and folks will be able to apply for it like
Yes.
somewhere
On
in
our
the middle of
website.
2025.
Yeah, I would say the end of Q1 or Q2 will have the website updated with the applications and the terms on there. So not yet. They're not
Hooray.
available yet, but coming soon.
All right, so I'm definitely going to leave all the links to the VentureVet website, to the Right to Start, and to the Courtney by herself. Feel free, do not spam, be respectful, but feel free to join, to ask, and to support, because what they are doing, God, I'm in love.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. It's so good to chat with you.
Thank you so much. It was a great conversation.